An opioid, probably something that registers as a bad thing. Illegal drug like heroin, fentanyl, lethal painkillers. Opioids aren't meant to be bad. When used correctly, they're actually designed for helping. Today I'm here to talk to you about the misuse of opioids. My mom has some local experience. She works in social services at the courthouse, and I have watched a documentary that came to my school called Written Off about a man who gets addicted to a legal painkiller from actually just an ingrown toenail, and the results actually are death. So I just wanted to dig a little bit more deeper into this topic and to just be a little bit more educated. So today I'm going to give you an overview of the impacts of opioids, what opioids actually are, and solutions for opioid misuse. Let's start with an overview. Opioids are a legal or illegal substance that relieves pain, either chronic or severe, which are prescribed by a healthcare professional. They target, again, severe and chronic pain. So an example of an opioid would be oxycodone, I'm sure you've heard of that before, or codeine. This chart shows how opioids change the chemistry in the brain. Opioid receptors in the nervous system embed in an outer layer of a neuron. Outside opioid receptors are responsible for the pain and pleasure relief. This poses problems with dealing with opioid misuse. So the higher the dosage, the higher the effect, which alters the brain of thinking it constantly wants more. Opioids are very addictive, even when using correctly, using as prescribed. Opioid misuse is described as the distribution of opioids to others who are not prescribed the opioid. This chart can represent how many Americans misuse opioids. On drugabuse.gov, it states that according to the National Institute on Drug Abuse, which focuses on advancing addiction science, roughly 25% of patients prescribed opioids for chronic pain misuse them. This is really important for all of opioid users because opioid misuse accounts for over half of the drug overdoses in the United States. And even worse, drug overdose is actually the #1 killer of people under the age of 50 in America. Now that we've discussed some background and statistical data of opioid use, let's dig into some of the effects opioid misuse have on the U.S. and others. Family and friends come first. Young adults are more likely to become addicted to a painkiller. That said, always lock up your personal medications. And if you have other people in the household, such as family or friends, talk to them about it. According to Dose of Reality of Wisconsin, which focuses on opioid misuse and prevention around the state, 70% of people who abuse painkillers are from a relative or a friend. It's really important to stay informed, and you should never ever share prescribed medications with one another. Choosing opioid addiction over family have really serious negative impacts. Pregnant mothers who are addicted to opioids have the chance to give birth to a child who is born addicted to that opioid and potentially taken away from the family. Next up, here's a quote from a social worker at the local Vilas County Courthouse that says, "Children placed in and out of home care often suffer from PTSD and childhood trauma. And at a recent training that she attended, it was reported that 80% of inmates were in out-of-home care at some point in their childhood." That was said by Heather Johnson, a social worker at the Vilas County Courthouse. Here's just a chart that shows the levels in an opioid addict's home life environment. So the child experiences a very toxic environment, very stressful environment, and has a very low attachment to the caregiver and a low stable adult in the household. These leads to problems in the caregiver and the child in the future. In my developmental psychology class, we learned about child abuse, which is more of the intentional physical side of abuse. We learned about child neglect, which is unintentional and a failure to parent, reward, respond, care for, things like that. We also learned about child maltreatment, which is domestic violence that affects child and children in the household. Opioid addicts can be characterized in all three of these categories. Which shows really violent and unstable effects in the household. There are also some fiscal effects, so in the household, but what about beyond in the community? Here are some fiscal effects on the community. First, employee-to-employer relationship is not stable. Addicts struggle to find jobs, most likely will not get hired, and if hired, their productivity will be very low. They're not dependent or reliable on anything in the job matters. Here's some community effects. So first off, we have some costs in the community from opioid addicts. So just a couple. Some healthcare sector portions are emergency room visits, ambulances rides, and disease-related costs, which can be hepatitis, AIDS, tuberculosis. Some criminal justice, so more of like the police situation is police protection, hearings and jurisdictions in the courtrooms. Also, child care services due to parental abuse on opioids is also a main factor in the community, which takes away from its actual needs in the community. Okay, so more on a positive note, opioids in Wisconsin have not been increasing since 2012. This is thanks to my next point, treatment options and solutions. First option is a treatment facility. A facility is focused on overcoming addiction goals and goals beyond their drug and addiction states. Specialists include psychologists, psychiatrists, counselors, and teachers within the facility. They are open 24/7 and are really flexible to work with you in your schedule and what your goals are in your future. They have different options. You can choose a treatment facility based on your gender, based on your religious avenues, or even ethnic and cultural embrace, to embrace your roots if you want to go that route. Some of the steps for a treatment facility include medical detoxing, mental health coaches, fitness and wellness, group and individual health services, and educational experience as well as life planning. There are also another option called treatment coaches, which are available by appointment if you call. So we have the warm line. The Marshfield Clinic Health System has the recovery warm line. An individual or someone who is dealing with an individual who is an opioid addict can call this hotline, whether a parent, a family member, a friend, and a local coach will be available on the hotline, which is operated by Marshfield Clinic. These coaches are trained by professionals, and actually Marshfield Clinic Systems coaches are trained by the Connecticut Community for Recovery Coach Academy. So they're very reliable and very well trained. The last option for treatment is opioid sciences, which focuses on the brain to addiction chemistry and connection. Scientists have come up with FDA-approved medications to overcome addiction. Methadone, naltrexone. However, they're really expensive and they're hard to access, as well as unutilized, and people aren't usually eligible to receive it. And they're still kind of being in the works, but this could be a potential result and solution in the future. Medications are able to alter the effects on an abused opioid without any mental effects, without any brain damage or brain chemistry change too dramatically. Medications tackle withdrawal symptoms and psychological crave that an opioid would normally produce. These have actually been tested on opioids and alcohol addicts, and they produce really good effects, like I said, without the damage on the brain. In conclusion, I've told you a little bit about the opioid crisis in the United States, as well as a little bit more locally here in the Northwoods. Some effects of opioid misuse, the background of opioids, and some treatment options. The opioid crisis is not talked about a whole lot, and it is seen as an illegal matter, but legal and illegal opioids can cause overdose and are addictive. And if they're not prescribed correctly, it could result in some pretty nasty consequences. So whether prescribed painkiller for an ingrown toenail, removed tooth, arthritis, or severe nerve damage, stay aware of your usage and never ever share drugs with someone else. If you or someone you know is misusing opioids and needs help with their addiction, please call 1-800-662-HELP. This is the hotline. Thank you so much, and I hope you enjoyed my speech.